So Janet, welcome. I've had the privilege of knowing Janet now for some years. We did at some stage attend the same church in Sydney, but I've had a closer connection with Janet over the last few years. She's joined the board of our little organisation, but more importantly, she has been a great help in working with me and our leadership team. And that's given me a little window into her professional career that has spanned some years, where she has worked with small and large organisations alike, and very large organisations, to help them with leadership and culture in their sort of senior management teams. To that end, she, over the last 18, 20 years, has been running her own partnership with a colleague, I gather, in Melbourne. Janet has gone through many transitions herself, notably, of course, hailing from a different continent, which we'll find out soon when she speaks. And so we're delighted that she's going to share her experiences with us. I'm just going to let someone else into the room who's just about to join, also a newcomer. So I might just ask him to say a word of introduction before you start, Janet. But we're delighted that you're able to speak and share with us. Now, Neil, sorry to put you on the spot straight away, but I do know you, so I think you're up for it. Are you able to show us? Yes, there you are. Now, it's earlier where you are. We've just introduced our speaker and all those who are new to the meeting. So I might just ask you to say a couple of words before we get underway. So just a little bit about who you are and what's brought you here, Neil. You'll have to unmute yourself.
They say I always speak better when it's muted. But I'm sitting at the Cleveland Lighthouse, so you can see the view over there. Yeah, so I joined the group. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in the City Bible Forum on and off over the last probably 8 or 9 years, and absolutely love the ministry and what happens. I was involved in New South Wales, and then have been involved in a job for a charity called Many Rivers over the last 4.5 years. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not quite sure which one it was, I finished up there at the end of last year and spent some time in South Africa with my family, which I really needed to do after 7 years of not seeing them. And then, you know, came back in the new year, went on a few holidays, came back in the new year ready to look for something new, and unfortunately COVID came along, and yeah, so spent the last 7, 8, 9 months trying to figure out what's next. I'm starting to get really old, so I know that works against me slightly, but I know I've got a mighty God that works for me, so I'm pretty relaxed about it all, but need to sort of find something where I can have a bit more longer term purpose than just day by day.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for sharing. And Neil's up in Queensland, so it's slightly earlier up there. Okay, Janet, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Peter, for that very kind introduction, and yeah, welcome to my session. A particular welcome to those of you who are new. This subject that we're going to look at, I think is a little bit different because Peter's kind of given me a bit of an overview of what this group's covered before. I think it'd be fair to say mostly the sessions are about the mechanics of getting a new job and like really great information exchange and so on. And some good tips around that from really great professionals. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to look at the internal process that we go through. The psychological stages is the, I guess, the wording that I'd like to introduce you to when people go through transition. So it's not stuff out there. It's not about the change per se or how to make that change happen. It's about what goes on inside when people are faced with change. And we know it's easier to get through change when it's self-initiated. And some of you may have put your hands up and said, you know, yeah, I'm going to take this redundancy, or do you know what, I'm going to quit. I'm going to have a timeout, a gap year, and I'm going to do something different. Maybe a little bit harder when that change is actually introduced to us, maybe as a shock. Maybe it's something that we feel has been forced on us and it's the last thing that we need right now. So there's some work that's been done by a guy called William Bridges over the last few decades, and I'll give you references to his books if you want to dig in deep. So I'm just going to really, I guess, promote some discussion for the breakout groups in what I'm going to present to you, and I'll share some of my own experiences of transition to hopefully make that live, and some of the people as well that I've met along the way. Because in preparing this talk, I realized, and I'm heading for a big birthday next year, so I'm doing a lot of reflection at the moment, but I realized that I must have met thousands of people in work situations just by virtue of the job that I've done, both in corporates in the UK, and that's a bit of a clue where I'm from if you've not already gathered with my accent, and also here in Australia. So running programs, large programs, conferences. You said you'd been at a conference, Paul, speaking to groups of people. You quickly amass people that actually recognize you. You might not recognize them. You don't get to really chat properly with a lot of those people, but you do really get to chat with your own friends. And just before I start and talk about what William Bridges has to say, just a couple of observations for me about people's change appetite that I have noticed around work and change in jobs and so on. And I think there's three broad categories of people. There's the people that just love change. You know, they love variety, they crave it. It's not exciting if it's not different. And it's hard to keep up. I have a friend like this. It's hard to keep up with what she's doing. It must be exhausting to be her. COVID's kind of curtailed that activity a little bit for her at the moment, but you know, she's somebody that her CV is like short, sharp bursts. And I'm sure people like Hohne sees a lot of that in terms of resumes that are presented. Short, sharp bursts. People are looking for change, make it happen frequently. The second group is probably the biggest group of people, I think, which, yeah, people cope with change. They see themselves as adapters to change, but unless there's something in it for them, they're not really going to make it happen. You know, there's got to be a real reason. Maybe they're going to change roles to broaden their experience, to prepare them for a bigger job, or maybe they just fancy a change and they're broadening into something different for a particular reason. Most people fit here. There's got to be a rationale, but yeah, I'll get used to it and I'm prepared to take the risk. I think that's that second group. And then the third group, which I think is getting increasingly less in our society, is the group that I was reminded of in a Zoom call I had earlier this year with a friend that I have not seen, giving my age away now, for about 42 years. I was friends with, she was also called Janet, best friends with her through secondary school. And I hadn't seen her face to face until earlier this year when I caught up with her. Janet left school at 16 and worked for the same bank until she retired in February and did very similar roles. So that group, for reasons of what's happening with work and what's happening in terms of change in every aspect of our lives, is pretty thin now. But it was good to be reminded of that. So I guess what I'm saying is that we all have different dispositions towards change. Some of us love it, we crave it. You know, we won't find change stressful as such. Others find that more difficult. But it's, as I said before, it's not the change I'm going to talk about per se. It's actually what Bridges is talking about in his work, of these three stages. So I'm going to introduce you to them to now. By way of promoting some discussion, hopefully maybe validating some of the feelings that you may be experiencing in your own transition. And I guess my best hope is that it might help you in some way navigate through to your next opportunity. Not by giving you the mechanics and some skills of what to do, but just actually by thinking about your feelings and actually how to move forward in a transition stage. So if I can just introduce the three stages to you. I understand, Peter, that we're going to break out for questions at the end of this, and then is that right? So if anybody has questions.
We'll have a time perhaps just all together for a little bit and then go to breakout groups.
Okay, great. So if you do have a question, don't forget it, and we'll come back to it at the end. Okay. So William Bridges, as a Harvard graduate, change management consultant for many years in the US, and wrote many books on this subject. He identified the 3 stages. So the first stage, which is a bit unusual, because the first stage is an ending. It's about letting go. So we don't normally start with an ending, but his model does. As I've said before, it's more difficult to deal with an ending when it's been introduced or forced on you than it is if it's self-initiated. So I'm going to talk about what he says about endings, but just before I do that, just want to make the point that in my observation, endings can be brutal. I think maybe the most brutal ending that I have experienced in terms of my fraternity, people that I've worked with, was I was working in Adelaide running a program for an oil and gas company, and a guy had flown over that morning, like on the red-eye flight equivalent, whatever that is, from Perth to Adelaide to join the group. So he wasn't in like too great shape anyway. And in the introduction session, I could tell there was a lot going on for him. He was talking about a merger that had happened. He wasn't sure what was going on for his role. He was a little bit agitated. I was a little bit concerned, but anyway, we started the program and we broke for morning tea after about 2 hours. And morning tea, the HR director came to me towards the end of the morning tea and like knocked on the window, because I was sat in the room and participants were out still having the coffee, and she said, "Can I have a word with you?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Duncan," who was this guy, "Duncan won't be rejoining the group. We've just told him that he's been made redundant, and we've asked him to come and collect his belongings, and he's on the next flight out back to Perth." It's like, whoa, okay, right. So Duncan wasn't expecting that quite in that way. And I don't know what your experience is of the endings that you've had. That's pretty brutal. Hopefully you've not had anything quite like that. But even if you haven't, if it's been a much more gentler landing, Bridges says in his work that endings and actually thinking about what the loss is around those endings is really critical. So he talks about losses in a number of different ways. Maybe ending a role has actually caused a loss for you in terms of a feeling now that you're not achieving as much as you used to. You know, the job actually gave you an opportunity to tick many boxes in a day, the to-do list, you know. You had 150, 200 emails coming in, you got through them, gone. The red had disappeared. A feeling of achievement. It could be around that. Could be a loss around actually relationships. You know, the colleagues that maybe we didn't actually think we'd miss them, but we do. We miss the stimulus of the conversations. We miss the going out. Maybe COVID's changed that a bit, but we miss the going out and actually, you know, communing with them in a work situation, the water cooler conversations, or this year, you know, the conversations enabled through technology, which is not quite the same. So the relationships piece, or maybe it's the status that we miss. You know, people coming to us for things, coming to us for advice, for problems to be solved, recognizing that we've lost status because we could actually enact things through others because we were a leader, and now actually the losses around that. Now these things are real, and very often we don't give ourselves permission, I think, to actually think through these losses and just name them to ourselves even, or to people close to us, to acknowledge that they exist. It's part of the change process. It's not unusual. That sense of loss is absolutely what Bridges says is a key part of people moving through change. But in this first phase, the endings or the letting go, he also talks about ending and recognizing the benefits. So not just the losses, but actually the benefits that have been accrued through the job. So I like to think of it in terms of, you know, when you actually end a job or it's ended for you, you actually don't go out with a clean sheet. You've got a whole load of stuff that you've learned through that job, maybe some new skills, experience, networks of people. And that can't be taken away from you. That's figuratively in your backpack. You're actually taking that through to the next stage of transition with you, you've gained. And I think it's important, again, to reflect around, well, what are those things explicitly? Who are you now? What's your self-image now? I don't know whether any of you've done work on yourself. In my leadership programs, we spent a lot of time looking at the different characteristics within us which lead to behavior. Now, a characteristic, if people see themselves, have a self-image around, you know, having had something happen to them, I'll call it victim, that sounds a bit strong, but if that's the kind of self-image that we have, that's not a helpful self-image to help us through the next phase. So actually really thinking about what's the benefits, what's the new better position I'm now in, like better than ever before, because I've had the benefit of the experience of the role I've just finished. What's that now, and what does that mean to me? How do I actually see myself? And that's a really important question for people to answer. And yeah, I'd be interested maybe in the small groups if you want to explore that a little bit more, a little bit later in the session. Who are you now? Who are you now? Because recruiters will sniff that. You don't have to tell them, but they'll sniff where you're at and who you are, what you are bringing to the next role. So endings, the first phase, the letting go. I guess I had, just to finish that just to share a story with you, I had it wasn't brutal, but it was a sudden experience of an ending. When I was 36, I came to Australia from the UK. I was truly of the opinion as I was leaving the UK, packing up my house, saying goodbye, partying with my friends on, as it happened, just to peg it into a time in history, I'd chosen a date months before, which happened to be Princess Diana's funeral service. So people came to my party pretty emotional in the UK at that time. If any of you were there, you probably saw it, like it was highly charged. They all came and, you know, we were all very sad about that event. It was my leaving party. And I thought I'd maybe got rid of all my emotion and everything that had gone inside me at that point, because it had been such a big day and evening. However, a few days after that, a friend dropped me off at Manchester Airport for my trip over here. I'd told everybody, and I totally believe 100%, I was coming back. People said to me at that party, "You won't come back. You'll love it. You won't come back. You'll meet a husband. You won't come back." All these, no, I will be back. I was convinced of it. I almost couldn't think of anything different. I will be back. Anyway, getting on the plane, sitting down, opening the newspaper and breathing, because it had been a pretty big run up to my departure, and just sitting back in the plane was the first time I can remember it vividly, almost a jolt inside me, that actually I knew I wasn't going to be going back. It was the ending that I'd never allowed myself to have, and certainly hadn't therefore communicated it to anybody, I realized. So it's actually quite a felt thing, I think, an ending. When you realize that's gone, that's finished, on to the next. Yeah, so I'd like you to think about that in terms of endings, where you're at with those endings. Depending on what you've come from and how it happened is going to have something to do with that. Okay. So the second stage, that's probably the biggest piece I wanted to talk to you about. The second stage, which is the really important stage, and I guess the part that you're all obviously in, but maybe there's some lag on endings for some of you. The second stage in the Bridges model is the neutral zone. So this is the kind of the grey space, the space that's unclear, it's foggy, it has no defined time frame, which I think is really different. It doesn't have any structures necessarily within it. It's uncertain. And because of all of those things, it's very, very common for people to find this really hard. People can feel disorientated because the lack of structure. So a disorientation, almost, you know, what am I doing today? What day is it? There's no, those familiar structures and those familiar rhythms have gone. They can feel disillusioned, like, am I really good enough to get another job? Especially now, COVID, goodness me, what's to happen next year in the job market? will I ever work again? So people start to really have big confidence knocks. And that sometimes can actually be like spiraling down to another D word. We've talked about disorientation and disillusionment, but despair. And I speak to people who actually, they may not say that, but actually you can pick that up, that people actually are feeling, this is not going to get any better. This is actually really serious. And I don't know whether I can actually share this with anybody because it's a bit too personal. I don't know whether I can share it with my family because I've got to, you know, I've got to keep the facade of I'm okay. And that's actually a space that I'll come back to, but I'm really would really encourage people that this neutral zone, we don't have to do it alone. And I think this group is fantastic. Great of you, those of you who've come, of course, who are just checking it out, I guess. But those of you as well who've been in it for a while and will have found your own level of trust to be able to share what's really going on for you. And that will be different. And you can't just turn that on Zoom on the first session, but actually feeling that you can actually go to each other for support and for challenge as well, because actually those two things need to be happening to help each other through the neutral zone. But if somebody's in despair, probably not a good idea to challenge them too much. They need the support piece. If somebody's languishing a bit and getting a little bit maybe too comfortable and forgetting the bigger picture, maybe a little bit of challenge. So I think you can do that well for each other in this group, but also with obviously your close friends, family, yeah, that can help you through this phase in terms of the psychological aspects of going through transition. So remember, it's normal to feel disillusioned, disorientated, and sometimes despair. A tip would be to create your own structures in this neutral zone. You know, don't let it just be completely unstructured. I have to make myself structure a day when there's no structure for me. I'm not good at dealing with no structure. You know, making yourself, putting it in your diary what you're doing, going to the gym, put it in your diary. So you've got time usage really mapped out. And the third tip is remember that backpack. You know, who you actually are now, the better you, because you've had the benefit of the experience in that last role. The other thing that Bridges is really clear about, and I really believe to be true, is it's in this zone, which has sounded a little bit unattractive up till now, but it's in this zone that the opportunities are going to emerge because we are at our own creative best. And the advice that Bridges gives is that we should sit with this. Now, I know this doesn't sound very practical because some of us have got to work to, you know, put food on the table, but he says sit with it. Really, really use it as an exploration phase. Look for the sparks, the ideas, which are maybe different to what you've done so far. Maybe it's a left field idea that builds in your competence and capabilities in some other way than maybe you've even imagined, and you've suddenly thought about it because guess what? You've had time to think about it in this neutral zone phase. Spot the sparks and don't rush the neutrality. Really just start to explore things. And I know one of your speakers talked about the importance of networks here. I think that's a great idea to actually help you in those sparks, but create the sparks for yourself as well. Think about what is it really that lights you up? You know, when are you at your best? What drives you? And what work actually can play to those strengths? Now, I'm saying all of this fully aware that some personality types find it difficult to sit in this zone. You know, those of you who've got a high achievement motive, like the kicking the goals, you know, ticking the boxes, go, 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 people, are going to find what I've just said really not quite them, not doable, not a good idea. But I would encourage you to do it anyway. Recognize this is a stretch for you because it's not how you naturally are, but actually start to think about creating yourself some targets around ideas that you can generate for yourself based on what you uniquely know about yourself. I'll share something about me and my own transition here. And I haven't admitted this to a group before, actually, so you're the first group to actually hear this, but I myself am going through a career transition. So Peter's talked about, I've run a consulting business. I worked in corporates in the UK, I worked in a global firm here in Australia, and then I started my own business. Last year, so way before COVID, I started to decide, I say started because it's a tentative process, that I was going to wind down my business somewhat. And partly because I'm getting older, I've got a big birthday coming up next year, as I said before, and I was feeling exhausted. My job involved me traveling on planes here, there and everywhere all the time, running things. And I thought, okay, time to slow down and to maybe start to think about, well, what do I do with that time that, that's being created for me? And my idea was, and Peter said I do some work with the City Bible Forum and some other organisations on some not-for-profit boards, and that's what I thought I was going to do. And so I stopped doing any business development, for which for all my clients that knew me, I had people ringing me saying, are you okay? They thought actually I was sick, which was actually quite sweet that they followed up, because normally I would be the one that would be ringing them and, you know, not letting an opportunity get past. But I changed my behaviour. I didn't make any proactive calls, and I just did work really that came into me naturally through those relationships. I didn't know what to call this phase, but one day I was having root canal treatment, my favourite pastime, with my dentist, and I was kind of in between him putting all this rubber, you know, dam into my mouth. I was explaining to him where I was at, and I said, I don't know how to explain it. And he said, well, as dentists, if we do that, he said, we talk about, we limit our practice. That's a great phrase. I'm limiting my practice. So that's kind of where I was in my head. Anyway, of course, the inevitable happened. Less work came in, and I was relatively occupied doing other work, but not busy like I had been busy. And last year, I realised I do need to be busy. Now, here's the new insight. Last year, I got to work with an organisation that does counselling as a board member and start to think about counselling. Actually, it was something I did in my early 20s. I got a short diploma. It was a short diploma I did on top of the work that I was doing during the day in counselling. So I've always had an interest in it. In fact, I used to, early in my career, mix up coaching and counselling. It's two very different processes. So I learned that pretty early on. I do a lot of coaching. That's very different to counselling. But there's some underpinning skills, questioning and listening being two of those skills that are common to both of those different careers. And I've started to get excited, and this is what I'm telling you about this kind of inner spark thing. I've started to get excited about training up as a counsellor. Now, not to become a psychologist and to do a 6-year degree and to become like a low-level counsellor, let's say, somebody who maybe refers other people on. And I've started to explore the niche that might look like. And I'm thinking, this is all thinking at the moment, that maybe that would be working with Christian couples who are having maybe difficulties in their marriage relationships, and helping and getting, when I say a market, that's probably the wrong word, but I'm not looking to build an empire, but actually maybe, you know, advertising that through churches and so on, and getting referrals that way. And I've spoken to people who are counsellors who give me leads on the kind of courses I could do, have given me some advice, etc. So there's an example, I guess, just by way of when I've been in that neutral, unstructured zone a little bit, not completely unstructured, but certainly more than I've been used to, ideas have come up, and now who knows, it may not happen, but I'm excited about it. And I just want to share that as a bit of an encouragement for you, because it kind of came out of nowhere, really. Well, it did come out of somewhere, but I've had time to let it gestate and think it through, and now I've got to get onto the action. So yeah, so that the second stage, the creative stage, where things can hit you left of center. And I would encourage you to think about things differently, not just look for the same that you've had previously, because apart from, you know, anything else, our world is changing and work is changing dramatically. I don't have to tell you that. Third and final stage, very quick. Bridges talks about new beginnings. So when we do have that spark, which then goes into a flame, you know, the flames are fanning, we will actually feel reinvigorated, energized, and we'll be on track for something new and different. We actually will feel it. I was talking to somebody earlier this week, and she was talking about when she was young. I can't quite believe this, but I believe her. It sounds so kind of cute and trite, but she couldn't wait at night when she was young to come back to work. So going home was a disappointment from her from work. You know, she couldn't wait to get up in the morning to get back to work because she was enjoying the stimulus so much and what she was doing. I thought, that's something to aim for, isn't it? Really, that's maybe a little bit idealistic, but that kind of feeling that I'm in the zone, I'm doing what I'm passionate about, I'm putting my skills to work, I'm learning things. That's what we all want, and that's the final stage of his model. Just one final point to make, which is something personal. Some of you here are Christians in the group, I understand. Maybe some of you don't even know what a Christian is. I am a Christian and have been for a long time. In terms of transitions, I do believe that even though it's not evident to me at the time and hasn't been evident to me, the things that life has thrown at me, not just work-wise, but life-wise, the struggles that I've had in my life of different kinds, my husband being sick for a while, etc. It's not been always at that moment evident to me that God has a plan for me and God has things in control. My feelings have somehow kind of, been bubbling, and I've not always realized that. When I look back on my life, and big birthday approaching, I can honestly say that I can see how God has been at work in parts of my life that I wouldn't have realized at the time. And I just marvel at that, really, in terms of how I do feel he's had his hand on me in really the tough times as well as the good times. Maybe it's more obvious when you look back in the tough times, and how he sustained me through all of those things. So I would just offer that as an encouragement to you. Those of you who are Christians, maybe that seems an unusual thing to say for those of you who aren't, but that's been my experience. Okay, Peter.
Thank you very much, Janet.